Welcome back to Midnight Delight. Tonight, we're diving into tales that might just make you second guess what you see in the night and who or what you open your door to. Settle in and turn down the lights and prepare for stories that will stay with you long after it's over. So, if you're ready, let's step into the unknown together. It all started with a Halloween party. One we almost didn't go to. But you know how things are. You get that group text, someone sends a last-minute invite, and the next thing you know, you're throwing on a costume and piling into the car with your friends. Well, that's exactly how it happened for us. Me, Mason, Hannah, and Nate. Just four regular people looking to have a little fun on Halloween night. The party was at this big, old house on the edge of town. I swear, it looked like something straight out of a horror movie. Like twisted trees, peeling paint, and windows so dark you couldn't see inside. There was no way anyone actually lived there. But the lights were on, and the sound of music echoed from behind the heavy wooden door. "This place looks creepy as hell," Hannah said as we walked up the stone path. "Perfect for Halloween, right?" Mason grinned. He was always the brave one, always up for anything. Nate nudged him. "You sure this is the right place? Feels like we're about to walk into some kind of a cult." I laughed it off, but there was something off about that house. We still weren't going to turn back now. We were here to have a good time, and we weren't about to chicken out. We pushed open the door and walked inside. The party was already in full swing. People in costumes crowded every corner, laughing, dancing, and drinking. But there was one thing everyone kept talking about. This punch. The witch's brew, they called it. A massive bowl sat in the center of the room, surrounded by fog that seemed to roll off it like dry ice. It was dark, almost black, and smelled sweet, like berries and spices. But there was something else, something bitter beneath it. Hannah was the first to try it. "It's so good! You guys have to try this," she said, handing out cups to the rest of us. We all drank, and I'll admit, it was amazing. It tasted like nothing I had ever had before. Sweet and spicy with strange warmth that spread throughout my body. We laughed, joked around, and pretty soon the rest of the night became a blur. We woke up the next morning in Hannah's living room. I had the worst headache of my life, and everything felt wrong. It wasn't just the hangover. It was something deeper. Like the world was off balance. "What the hell happened last night?" Nate groaned, sitting up and rubbing his temples. "I barely remember anything after we drank that punch." "That punch was weird, right? I mean, it tasted good, but I don't know, something about it didn't feel right," Mason added, his voice a bit uneasy. I nodded. "Yeah, same, and my head is killing me." But it wasn't just a headache. As the fog in my brain started to clear, I noticed something else. The room was different, brighter somehow, and when I focused on the coffee table in front of me, it moved. Not like a shift or a wobble, it moved. I blinked, sure I was imagining things, but when I concentrated again, the table slid across the floor like it was being pulled by invisible strings. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, my heart racing. Hannah looked at me wide-eyed. "What the hell? How did you do that?" "I don't know, I just thought about it." Mason stared at the table, then turned his hand over, palm up. A small flame flickered to life in his hand. He yelped and dropped it, but the flame didn't burn out. It floated there, hovering above his palm like some kind of a magic trick. "Holy, what the hell is going on?" Nate jumped up, looking freaked out. He stumbled backward, but instead of hitting the wall, he disappeared. Like, literally vanished, only to reappear a few feet away. We all froze, staring at each other, trying to make sense of what just happened. Powers? We had powers? But how and why? Hannah was the first to say what we were all thinking. It's that punch. The witch's brew. We sat there in stunned silence, the realization sinking in. That punch wasn't just some Halloween drink. It had done something to us, changed us in ways that made no sense. We need to find out what's going on, Mason said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. That house, the party, there's got to be an explanation. We decided to go back to the house that night, but when we got there, it was empty. No lights, no music, no people. It looked abandoned, like it had been for years. The windows were all boarded up, and the door was locked tight. This can't be right. We were just here last night, Nate said, pounding on the door. What the hell is going on? Maybe it was some kind of, illusion? Hannah suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. As we stood there trying to make sense of it all, the air grew colder. I shivered, and when I turned around, I saw her. A woman dressed in a long, tattered black dress, standing in the shadows just beyond the tree line. Her eyes were glowing red, and her smile sent a chill down my spine. That's her, I whispered, backing away. That's the witch. The others turned to look, but before we could do anything, she spoke. You drank my brew, she said, stepping closer. Now you are bound to me. What do you want from us? Mason demanded, trying to sound brave, but I could see his hand shaking. The witch smiled, her teeth sharp and jagged. You have until the next full moon to break the curse. If you fail, your souls will be mine. How do we break it? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. She laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the night. That is for you to discover. But know this, the powers I have given you come at a price. Use them wisely, or they will consume you. With that said, she vanished, leaving us standing there, terrified and confused. We spent the next few days trying to figure out how to break the curse, but the more we used our powers, the worse things got. It was like they had a mind of their own, growing stronger, more uncontrollable. Mason's fire spread without warning, burning everything it touched. Nate's teleportation became erratic, sending him to random places, sometimes miles away. Hannah could hear voices, whispers in the dark that wouldn't leave her alone. And me? I couldn't stop moving things. The more I tried to control it, the more things around me would shift and fly across the room. It was like the powers were taking over, and we were losing ourselves to them. We tried everything, researching old books, looking up spells online, even visiting psychics, but nothing worked. Every lead was a dead end, and the full moon was getting closer. 2 days before the full moon, we were out of options. That's when Hannah suggested something desperate. We need to go back to the house, she said. There's got to be something there, some clue we missed. We didn't have any better ideas, so we agreed. That night we went back to the old house, hoping for some kind of a miracle. When we got there, the door was unlocked this time, creaking open on its own. The house looked different inside, darker, more sinister. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and rot. We wandered through the rooms, searching for anything that could help us. Then, in the basement, we found it. A book, old and dusty with strange symbols on the cover. It felt wrong just holding it, like it was pulsing with dark energy. "This has to be it," Mason said, flipping through the pages. "There's a ritual in here. We need to reverse the curse." We gathered what we needed and performed the ritual that night. But something went wrong. The ground beneath us shook, and the witch appeared again, her eyes burning with fury. "You think you can escape me?" she hissed. "You're mine." The room filled with darkness, and I felt something cold wrap around my throat, squeezing the air out of me. But just as I thought it was over, Hannah spoke the final words of the ritual, and the witch screamed. The darkness lifted and she was gone. We collapsed, grasping for breath, the weight of the curse finally gone. Our powers were gone too, but we didn't care, we were free. We never talked about it again, and we never went back to that house. But sometimes late at night, I could still feel her presence, watching, waiting. The full moon is coming again, and a part of me wonders, did we really break the curse? Or is she just waiting for the next time to return? When the flyer for the scariest haunted house in the country landed on my porch, I knew I had to go. My friends Jordan, Becca, and Sam were all in too. We'd been thrill seekers since high school. Haunted houses, ghost tours, you name it, we'd done it. But this one, the Hollow House, promised to be unlike anything we'd experienced. No one could describe what happened inside, just that no one left the same. Sounded like a challenge. We drove out to the edge of town where the trees were bare and the air seemed colder. The house itself was massive, looming over us with dark windows like eyes. A single flickering sign read, "The Hollow House." No bright lights, no long lines of people, just the four of us standing at the gates with a nervous-looking employee who handed us waivers to sign. "This feels different," Becca whispered, her voice betraying a hint of unease. Normally she was the most excited, but there was something off, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Come on, Bex, it's just a haunted house. What's the worst that can happen?" Jordan teased, but I noticed he wasn't laughing like usual. We handed the waivers back and the employee nodded. No smile, no small talk. He just opened the gate with a long, rusty creak and waved us in. The second we stepped through, the gate slammed shut behind us with a deafening clang. I turned, but the employee was gone. The street was gone. Only the house stood before us, much closer than it had been before. That was impossible. "Did the house move?" Sam asked, looking pale under the dim moonlight. We approached the door, and just like the gate, it creaked open, without us even touching it. The moment we crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't like any haunted house we'd ever been in. There were no strobe lights, no cheesy sound effects, just silence. Heavy, oppressive silence, like the house was holding its breath. "Hello?" Jordan called out. His voice echoed, but there was no response. The entryway was massive, with dark wooden floors that groaned under our feet. Dust hung in the air like the place hadn't seen life in decades. But it was more than that. It felt alive, like the house was watching us. As we'd ventured deeper, the door behind us slammed shut, sealing us inside. I felt my stomach drop. This was no ordinary haunted house. We wandered into a grand hallway lined with old portraits. The faces in the paintings seemed to watch us as we moved. Their eyes followed us, their expressions twisted into sneers and scowls. Suddenly, the air turned icy and the lights flickered. We all stopped, huddled together, waiting. Then, from down the hall, we heard it. A soft scraping sound, like something was being dragged across the floor. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer. "Did you guys hear that?" Sam asked, his voice barely a whisper. None of us answered. We didn't need to. We all heard it. As we walked, the house seemed to change. The layout twisted and shifted, the halls growing longer, the rooms unfamiliar. Every time we turned a corner, we found ourselves back where we started. It didn't make any sense. I swear we've passed that same mirror like 3 times, Becca said, her voice starting to shake. I looked at it, the tall, cracked mirror in a gold frame. She was right. But how? Suddenly the mirror flickered like a TV with a bad reception. For a split second, I saw something. Something moving behind the glass. A shadow, tall and thin, creeping closer. I blinked and it was gone. We turned to leave, but the hallway had changed again. The door we came through was gone, replaced by another endless stretch of dark wood and flickering lights. Panic set in. We started running, turning corner after corner, but every hallway looked the same. The lights flickered again and that scraping sound returned. Louder. Closer. This time it was accompanied by whispers. Low, guttural voices that seemed to seep out of the walls. And there was no question this time. We all heard it. The voices. But we couldn't make out what they were saying. It was like they were speaking in a language we weren't meant to understand. And then, from behind us, came a deep, rattling breath. I turned slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. A figure stood at the end of the hallway. Tall, like impossibly tall, with long, spindly arms that dragged along the floor. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel its eyes on me. Cold, dead eyes. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching, waiting. I didn't want to find out what it was waiting for. We sprinted down the hall, but no matter how fast we ran, we couldn't shake the feeling that it was right behind us. The walls seemed to close in, the floor creaking and groaning under our weight. The whispers grew louder, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of dread. "Where's the exit?" Becca cried, tears streaming down her face. But there was no exit. Every door we tried led to another room, another hallway. The house was alive and it didn't want to let us go. Finally, we stumbled into a room that was different from the others. A large, circular room with walls lined with old, dusty furniture. At the center stood a single, massive grandfather clock. Its hands were spinning wildly, faster and faster. As we approached the clock, the air grew colder, the whispers louder. The floor beneath us creaked and groaned, and I could feel something. Something terrible, lurking just out of sight. Suddenly, the clock struck midnight, and everything went silent. The whispers stopped, the lights flickered out, and the air grew still. For a moment, I thought maybe we'd done it. Maybe we'd found a way out. But then from the darkness came a voice. "You're too late." The floor gave way beneath us, and we fell into darkness, screaming. When I woke up, I was back in the entryway of the house, but something was wrong. The air was thick and heavy, and I could hear the sound of faint whispers just beyond the walls. I turned to find the others, but they were gone. I was alone. Alone in the house, trapped. The gate was open now, the way out just a few steps away. But when I tried to move, I couldn't. My feet were rooted to the spot, like the house had claimed me. And then I saw it. My reflection in the mirror across the room. Except, it wasn't my reflection. The figure staring back at me was twisted, deformed, its face pale and gaunt, its eyes hollow and lifeless. I wasn't me anymore. I was a part of the house. Just another ghost waiting for the next group of thrill seekers to arrive. It was Halloween night, and the whole town of Millfield was buzzing with excitement. Kids dressed as ghosts, witches, and monsters roamed the streets with bags half filled with candy, while parents chatted in small groups, keeping a watchful eye on them. The air was crisp, the sky was dark, and the moon hung low, casting an eerie glow over the town. But by 10 o'clock, things had quieted down. Most of the kids were home, and the only ones left on the street were teenagers looking for trouble or candy. That's when the strange knock came at Mr. Miller's door. Mr. Miller was one of those grumpy guys who hated Halloween, always muttering about how kids these days don't know respect. He hadn't even bothered to carve a pumpkin this year, let alone hand out candy. But the knock was persistent, and finally, with a sigh, he went to answer. He opened the door to find a group of kids, 5 of them, all dressed in weird, old-fashioned costumes that looked like they belonged in a different century. Their faces were hidden behind creepy masks, blank and lifeless. One wore a clown suit, another a skeleton costume, a third looked like a plague doctor with a long beak, and the other 2 were dressed as something unrecognizable, their masks twisted and inhuman. "Trick or treat," they said in unison, their voices hollow and cold. "Look, I don't have any candy," Mr. Miller grumbled. "Go find someone else." The children didn't move. They just stood there, staring at him with those empty eyes. "Trick or treat," they repeated, but this time their voices were louder, angrier. "Fine," Mr. Miller snapped, slamming the door shut. "Go bother someone else." As he turned to walk away, he heard a whisper, barely audible, but chilling all the same. "Your greatest fears will find you." Mr. Miller froze, a shiver running down his spine, but he brushed it off as a trick, some prankster teens trying to scare him. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And that's when he felt it, the sensation of something crawling up his arm. He looked down and his skin went pale. Spiders. Hundreds of tiny spiders swarmed up his arms, covering his body in seconds. He screamed, swatting at them, but they kept coming, more and more, until he was covered from head to toe. He stumbled into his living room trying to brush them off, but it was no use. By the time his neighbors heard his screams, it was too late. They found him curled up on the floor, mumbling incoherently, his face pale and eyes wide with terror. Word spread quickly, and soon the whole town knew about the strange trick-or-treaters. But the kids kept coming, knocking on doors and demanding more than candy. At the Hartman house, little Emily Hartman opened the door when her parents weren't looking. The same 5 kids stood there, their faces hidden behind those haunting masks. "Trick or treat," they said, their voices echoing in the empty street. Emily giggled and held out her candy bag. "I'll trade. You give me something and I'll give you something." But the kids didn't laugh. They reached into their bags and pulled out something strange. Small bones tied together with string like some kind of a creepy charm. Emily frowned. "That's not candy." The kids tilted their heads, watching her, and then one of them whispered, "Your worst fear will come for you." Emily's eyes widened, and she slammed the door shut, locking it tight. But that night she had nightmares of drowning. She dreamed of water rising, filling her room, and no matter how hard she screamed, she couldn't breathe. When her parents found her the next morning, her sheets were soaked, and she was shivering, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw the water. I saw it." As the night wore on, the strange trick-or-treaters visited more houses. Some people gave them candy, others tried to turn them away. But for anyone who didn't give them what they wanted, their deepest fears came to life. Mrs. Thompson, the librarian, had always been terrified of rats. When she refused to open her door, the kids left a strange little charm on her doorstep. That night, she heard scratching in the walls, and when she opened her closet, rats poured out, swarming her over, their beady eyes glowing in the dark. By morning, she was gone. No one knew where, just that her house was empty and that all that was left was the faint smell of decay. The town was in chaos. People tried calling the police, but every time they arrived, there was nothing to be found. No kids, no charms, no sign of anything out of the ordinary. But the rumors spread, and soon, everyone was terrified to answer their door. Finally, a group of brave souls decided to figure out what was going on. Mason, Anna, Lucas, and Riley were high school seniors, known for their love of horror movies and ghost stories. They weren't about to let some weird kids in costumes scare them. "Let's go find them," Mason said, holding a flashlight like a sword. "Are you crazy?" Anna whispered, clutching his arm. "Those kids, they're not normal." "But they're just kids, right?" Lucas argued, though he didn't sound convinced. Riley nodded. "We have to do something. People are freaking out. My mom's too scared to even look out the window." So armed with flashlights and nerves of steel, they set off to find the phantom trick-or-treaters. They wandered the dark streets looking for any sign of the strange kids, but the town was eerily quiet. No laughter, no sounds of trick-or-treating, just silence, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. Then, from the shadows they heard it, the faint sound of whispering growing louder, closer. They turned a corner and there they were, the 5 kids, standing in a perfect line, their blank masks staring straight at them. "Trick or treat," they said, their voices cold and hollow. "What do you want?" Mason demanded, his voice shaking. The kids tilted their heads in unison, their masks gleaming in the moonlight. "We want what you fear," one of them whispered, stepping forward. Lucas took a step back, his face pale. "This is insane, we should go." But it was too late. The kids were surrounding them now, closing in, their hands reaching out. The air grew colder and the smell of rot filled their noses. "You won't escape," one of the kids whispered. "Your worst fear is coming for you." Mason tried swinging his flashlight at them, but it went out, leaving them in darkness. Suddenly, they weren't in the street anymore. They were in a maze of mirrors, the reflections twisted and distorted. The mirrors showed them things they'd buried deep inside, things they never wanted to see again. Anna screamed as she saw her greatest fear, being buried alive. Dirt filled her mouth, her lungs, and no matter how hard she clawed, she couldn't escape. Lucas was surrounded by darkness, endless and suffocating, with voices whispering in his ear, taunting him, telling him he'd never escape. Riley's vision was filled with fire, flames licking at her skin, burning her, consuming her whole. She felt every blister, every searing pain. And Mason found himself alone in a void, his friends gone, and an endless line of masks surrounding him, laughing, taunting. He tried to scream, but his voice was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The teens found themselves back in the street, gasping for breath, their bodies drenched in sweat. The phantom trick-or-treaters were gone, leaving only silence behind. They never spoke about what happened that night, but they could still feel it. The presence of those children, watching, waiting. And every Halloween after, they made sure to keep their doors locked tight, hoping, praying that the phantom trick-or-treaters would never come back. But deep down, they knew. Once you've been marked by the phantom trick-or-treaters, you're never really free. They're always out there, waiting, with blank masks and hollow voices ready to come knocking. And when they do, you better give them what they want. Thank you for joining me on this spine-tingling journey, my Midnight Delight family. If this tale made your skin crawl, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more stories that will keep you up at night. And remember, Halloween isn't always a time for treats. Sometimes it brings the stuff of nightmares right to your doorstep. Until next time, sleep tight and beware of the things that go bump in the night.